Joining us is Jodie Gillon, CEO from BioCT, and Albert Green, CEO of QuantumCT. We're really excited. Thank you for taking the time to sit down and chat with us. And I think probably the most basic question, right, is what is the biggest goal for you and your roles as far as looking at the future of Connecticut and what you're trying to accomplish within your respective organizations?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be happy to launch into that. So QuantumCT is about building the quantum technology ecosystem for the state of Connecticut. It's quantum technology and quantum is all over the news these days, and for good reason. And they're big players, both regional players and companies that believe that this is, in some sense, the next big thing. And regions, really want to be one of the hubs for where this technology really gets exploited. And there's going to be multiple. Sure. And it's not just the U.S. This is global.
Are you seeing is education a big factor? I feel like technologists understand quantum, but public at large, goes back to Quantum Leap or something in a Marvel movie.
That's my level of understanding.
Yeah. Well, no, for sure. It's a big thing. First of all, let me take a step back and say, I'm a physicist by training, and physicists, don't all understand quantum mechanics. I mean, we understand it from the mathematical level, but it's a very complicated topic. But education is a huge part in it. But, one of the things that we just put out there is that, you don't have to have a PhD in physics to participate in the quantum economy. And so the education and workforce is a critical part, both educating the community. We have a whole pillar associated with that, and also the more formal education that's necessary. And we team with all kinds of organizations to make that happen.
And Jodie, from a life sciences standpoint and BioCT, are similar sort of outlook and challenges, or obviously not in physics, but in bioscience?
Well, you're going to hear a similar theme from me as to Al, and I just want to start by saying this is the first time that Al and I are doing something jointly, but I do not think it will be the last time. I have a feeling that the two of us will be on quite a roadshow and journey together, so I'm excited that this is the first of many to come. BioCT is the life sciences trade organization for the state of Connecticut. So our mission is to ensure that we have a favorable fiscal and policy environment so that talent and companies in the life science sector could come here, stay here, grow here. So we do everything we can to enable that. So it's similar with, variation of the theme that we're more healthcare, med tech focused, but the entire spectrum of life sciences.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one quick thing. So the first thing, Jodie and I have had many conversations, and the fact of the matter is that the overlap between some of the quantum technologies and the biotechnologies in life sciences in terms of drug discovery, detection, there's a huge overlap. And in fact, some of the earliest technologies that people believe where quantum's going to really really make the huge impact is really in the life sciences.
How so?
I can certainly, Jodie can comment, but from a quantum technology perspective, there's some big things out there. Like, there are certain areas where being able to detect certain things at very minute levels, quantum technologies enable that, orders of magnitude what you can do today. Another thing that people hear about is that, when it comes to drug discovery, for example, it's, you always hear the stories of 10 years and, $10 billion to develop, and it costs a lot and leads to expensive and this and that. And so one of the things that quantum technology hopes to enable, and I think it will enable, is essentially being able to design drugs kind of from the ground up. And it's because it's just hard to do in the computing power that we have today.
Does that go into also the ability to model and kind of trials and things like now new capabilities to not only create and synthesize drugs, but to kind of shrink what might otherwise be these long FDA approvals processes by kind of running an accepted sort of test.
Absolutely, and modifying drugs and so on. But I think Jodie's the
I'm
expert
happy
in
to
this area.
tackle that one because there's so much pressure in our industry to do everything better, cheaper, faster. What is faster than quantum, right? So there's really no step along the trajectory that we are not evaluating. Machine learning, artificial intelligence, quantum technology could be around, preclinical models, optimizing drugs, optimizing the patient population, analyzing data, identifying the market. But the companies that are winning are leveraging these tools every step of the trajectory.
And is that something that, it's probably still potentially cost prohibitive, but maybe not with some support, but is that enabling smaller companies or early stage companies to be more competitive against the resources of a more enterprise existing organization?
So the model that I've seen, coming from both big and startup biotech, and even an AI startup as well, typically the larger or mid-sized companies will start evolving departments in this field and integrating it. Smaller companies, though, can partner, with service providers that, enable all of this optionality without having to grow their own internal team. So they're doing it, the very inception of the company. They just might not have it in-house.
Gotcha.
And how are your two organizations working together?
Outside of what we just described, because the industries are completely aligned. There was a recent announcement that I can ask Jodie Jodie can elaborate on, and that the governor announced a collaboration really between QuantumCT and BioCT to essentially build an innovation cluster. Mm-hmm. We're working extremely closely together in that. Again,
this has been, I think, an entire year in the making. So about a year and a half ago, Governor Lamont announced the Innovation Cluster Awards, up to $100 million, in partnership with various cities. We were part of the New Haven cluster. So we've had a team in place working on the application for the better part of a year. We're thrilled that we're the first recipient of the cluster award. So we will be co-located in New Haven, growing the ecosystem here, partnering with the city together.
Nice. And is it sort of a joint task force as far as distribution or application of funds, or how is that being governed, or are there specific requirements that the state's putting on those dollars?
Of course, the state doesn't just give out money without specific requirements, but they've been a tremendous partner every step of the process. I think Al will also attest that New Haven, the city of New Haven, incredibly collaborative approach, but really took the lead on this cluster and made sure that we were partners every step of the way while actually getting it done.
And actually led the proposal process, and we were happy to follow along, both having very full plates, but great partnerships.
And how are the educational institutions involved, either directly, or are they resources that you pull in?
Directly.
Yeah.
From a QuantumCT perspective, we're a joint initiative between Yale, UConn, and the state, but then we also, throughout our ecosystem, collaborate with almost all of the higher ed, not almost, all the higher ed in the state. And so they're, through the web of what QuantumCT does, they're a part of this whole initiative.
And from a BioCT perspective, virtually every academic institution in Connecticut is a member of BioCT. So we're a member-based not-for-profit. We have about 300 members either in the state of Connecticut or with a vested interest in the state of Connecticut. The cluster award, the goal of the state was to ensure public-private partnership. BioCT will be receiving $3 million over 3 years. The focus for BioCT is actually to grow workforce training, mentoring, and development. So that's the sole focus of the funding going towards us from the state.
And is that to supply sort of or fill current talent pipeline gaps, or is it anticipatory? What are you seeing in that realm?
I mean, it's a great question. And if I had to guess, I think it's both current, but I think it's even more so preparing for the future. The goal is to position Connecticut as a world leader and start preparing the state for that. So I would say there's more of an emphasis on future talent development, making sure we train our students for careers of the future and that we're able to attract them to stay here, but that also we grow companies here, so there's more jobs here, bigger footprint.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that keeping folks here, luring them in, kind of growing them. How many, what is the typical makeup of the organizations that you're working with? Is it a bigger lift to try and keep them, and sort of and keep this as an enticing place, or is it trying to lure them? What's the focus there?
We try and build a village around every organization based on need, and they all need different things. Sometimes they need financing, sometimes they need specific talent, sometimes they need very specific space. So my goal is not to make sure they only keep part of their operations in Connecticut, but everything in Connecticut. So, we want them to be hiring all their key roles here. If they need vivarium space, which is very specific space, specific type of laboratory space, we want to make sure we're putting the shovel in the ground now to build what we know companies will need in the future.
What's that look like for the quantum area?
Yeah. So QuantumCT, so the slice of that specifically directed at QuantumCT is 10 million over 3 years. We're also involved in several aspects of the build out, okay, because there's a whole build out of the physical space which will house us and others, and so we're the beneficiary of much more than the 10 that we specifically have, and that 10 is really about launching QuantumCT as an organization, standing it up. And we have 4 key pillars. One pillar is around creating an ecosystem that is going to be beneficial for entrepreneurs and startup companies. This, similar to what what Jodie's saying. Another pillar is around we call it Q Impact, which is around making sure to engineer enough collisions between our higher ed partners and our anchor corporations. And so the stuff that's created in the laboratory, because there's so much activity going on right now in the quantum space, it doesn't just stay in the laboratory. It gets deployed. And so we have, for real world applications. Another is around workforce, which is similar to what we've talked about. We call that Q Workforce. And then the fourth is really about, we call it Q Knowledge, and it's about what you originally said. It's just, the quantum. It's got to be, we want to try to make it so that quantum, we want to demystify it and bring it into the community. So we have events scheduled, and so that people are, it's not just the quantum mania, but they, just like when you hear the word transistor, you're not intimidated. I mean, right. Quantum, it's just like, whoa, I can't do that.
It's just tougher to bring that to the event, right? It's really time to show it until you can reach some milestones, right? Like a transistor, or you can it does this, right? Like quantum people hear, okay, so there's a chip that is now as powerful as 1 million computers or whatever. And it feels like for the layman, it's very tough to sort of wrap their head around until they see.
Let me push back a little bit on that.
Please do.
So what I would say is that so quantum technologies are around in everything that we encounter. This display, liquid crystal display, is based on quantum phenomena. Your iPad, your phone, these are all based on transistors. Transistors are inherently quantum devices. It's just that we tend to exploit them in classical ways. And so people already interact with quantum devices in everything that they do. And so this is just simply saying that this is sort of the next step in applying quantum technologies in a different way. So
What might that look like, and what jobs is it going to create in this area?
yeah, so there are applications that people point to. I mean, there's applications around drug design. There's applications around very advanced unjammable GPSs. There's applications around ways that you can encryption that you can't break. I mean, there's one of the key things that people talk about is just as you'd like to be able to design drugs and from the ground up, the same principles go into designing materials from the ground up. So materials that can do things that we can only dream of today, because you're really designing it from the atomic level.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's even the challenge. I'm the layman. I'm the voice of the audience, because I've been hearing QuantumCT and the quantum corridor for so long, and I'm like, great. I don't know what that means.
Yeah.
And he thinks chip, and I think Marvel movies.
Well, that's what we're all about, is trying to do that. And this initial grant allows us to get that off the ground and get started in communicating to you all. This is what it really means.
Yeah.
So I feel like I'm going to start a lot of sentences with similarly to Al, but we have a workforce talent level subcommittee of our board. And the greatest challenge when it comes to workforce in Connecticut, and we have a lot of heads of HR from various life science institutions around the state, is getting that first phone call responded to from out-of-state talent. So we need to overcome that. And I think we're all experiencing that. Once we get someone to come visit here, see the company, see the ecosystem, how much is here, how thriving it is, it's an easier sell. So it's much easier to keep companies here and keep talent here because they have a phenomenal quality of life than to get that first phone call return to consider Connecticut. And I think we're all partnering together to overcome that.
Yeah, I think that's a theme that constantly comes up at all events and all discussions, and certainly has come up in prep for the 19th. And something that came up yesterday, right, was someone who was from Connecticut, lived in New York, moved down to Georgia, and then decided to come back, and was talking about all the things that we often hear, like, oh, but we're between New York and Boston, or where you don't have a major hub, we have to go to New York, to fly, whatever. Was saying it as positive, right? And it was like, you just hear in the inflection that you could go skiing in 3 hours, you could be at the beach, you could be here, you could do this, you have hiking. And it got me wondering, like, about the idea of, instead of trying to keep this young group that is when they're exploring in their undergrad, life, like, really being the home that people are ready to kind of settle down to, and that quality of life. And maybe it doesn't achieve all the goals because, where do the young people go? But, I think trying to keep folks from ever leaving at mass seems like a really tough sell.
It's not. Okay, so let me it's not. Okay, so let me give a little bit of background. So I am relocating from a different region to take over to run QuantumCT. I'm actually coming from Northeast Ohio, so the Cleveland area. And let me just tell you, I mean, coming from the traditional Rust Belt to here, it's like I mean, there's no comparison in terms of what's needed to attract people and to keep people here versus keeping people, you know, in the Rust Belt.
But I think where my mind was coming from was that everyone always thinks there's something better than where they grew up, right? So it's almost like in Connecticut, if Connecticut was like, you know what, go explore. Try and find something better, right? Like there isn't. You'll be back, kind of thing, right? I think that's where where I was going, because I agree. I think once you see what is here, it's in a very prominent positive light.
Yeah, and regions benefit by this influx of people coming, people leaving. I mean, that's because that you know, flux of ideas that's coming in, I think ultimately benefits a region in my opinion.
So neither Al nor I are from Connecticut, right? So I'm actually a proud recovering Manhattanite. And if you would have told me 5 years ago I'd make Connecticut my permanent home, I'd lead a Connecticut organization, I would think you're absolutely crazy. I would say, no way. But I love that that's the fabric of my journey, because now it's our mission to get others like me to come here, consider Connecticut, and package and promote the state overall. And I think also, if we look at Yale, record numbers of Yaleys are staying in Connecticut. And part of the reason is we've all come together, and I'm grateful, shout out to the New Haven Chamber of Commerce for leading this. We now have a statewide internship program. So if they're spending their summer working in Connecticut for an incredible company, and then they get a full-time offer here, and if they compare that to, you know, the economics of Boston or New York City versus what they can earn in like Stanford or New Haven or Norwalk, really fun places for a 20-something, you know, to start their journey. It's becoming more enticing, and we're seeing those numbers grow.
And I'm going to say, you know, much like Jodie, I'm going to start my statement with you know, the fact that I think it's great that, you know, we didn't, you know, we're kind of new, and so we have a perspective of what can attract people and keep people and stuff like that. So
Yeah, you know, maybe it's different. Maybe, you know, I just have a skewed perspective. I think we're saying similar things, just differently. You know, because the state often looks at how many people that went to a state school and then, you know, are going to move out, you know, elsewhere. How many we're losing versus, I think, you know, to your point, if you have Manhattan as a benchmark and you're not necessarily as worried about, you know, the car tax as a make or break because, you know, you have a stable footing and everything else and can take advantage of the region, it's a whole different perspective. Jodie, something you were talking about, you know, is kind of building the facility or, you know, putting a shovel in the ground now for what's needed in the future. How are you kind of going out into the future to figure out or, you know, bet on what that, you know, is going to look like?
So we co-lead a space committee with the state of Connecticut. So we did a needs assessment, and, you know, it's a blessing and a curse. I think we're at less than 3% unoccupied rate for lab space, whereas Boston, I think they're approaching about 30%. So the needs are now, and that is part of the Innovation Cluster Award in New Haven. This is the city where innovation, life sciences has already taken root. And we're going to build a new physical infrastructure as part of this cluster award. So I can't wait. The needs are imminent. And for me, it's really exciting because I don't want any part of any company to go to any other state.
I could just and in terms of putting the shovel in the ground, I mean, coming at it from a maybe slightly complementary but slightly different perspective would be that, you know, for quantum technologies, there's very few quantum companies. Okay, so putting a shovel in the ground is about really establishing the thought leadership and the basis, the ecosystem that can attract the companies that are going to inevitably grow both here and other places, and it's really about, that's what I'm focused on in terms of putting the shovel in the ground, because 5 years ago, I mean, physicists talked about quantum computing, but it wasn't out in the vernacular, or not just quantum computing, quantum technologies. And so it's establishing that thought leadership position. We have a reason to win in that space.
There's always a challenge, like internal or in-state, awareness, excitement, pride, adoption of these, and then what's the lightning bolt to put Connecticut on the map for quantum or for bioscience, where the world takes notice, or the nation takes notice?
So I'll just give you a recent example.
It can be theoretical too, right? This would do it for us.
Okay,
right?
but I'll say one of the things that when you look at quantum computing, for example, that's what a lot of the rage is right now. There was a Nobel Prize in Physics that was announced, maybe 3 weeks ago, and that prize went to 3 physicists, and one of them was a Yale physicist, and that was around the core technology behind sort of the dominant quantum computing technology. So if you look at that, probably half or more of what we call the basic quantum computing architecture, it came out of Connecticut. Okay, so it's already on the map. I mean, it's building on that, and that's well known. I mean, it's well known.
It's interesting to me.
I was just going to add, it's really the same in the life science ecosystem, and it's really important that we get the stories out there. So the COVID vaccine was manufactured right here at Pfizer in Groton, Connecticut. Boehringer Ingelheim has their U.S. headquarters in Ridgefield, Connecticut, and won the Prix Galien. That's the Nobel Prize of Drug Development for a drug discovered right here at home that then saves the lives of patients all around the world. So you're going to hear me refer to critical mass quite often. But for instance, Merck just snatched up 2 of our startups in the state of Connecticut. So it's all about having these known entities with name recognition here and shouting from the rooftops of what we manufacture, what we discover, and what we market out of the state of Connecticut, while keeping growing and playing on our strengths. We have real opportunities in the future when it comes to onshoring, playing to our strength of manufacturing as well. So if we think about all the drugs also that, Alexion, I'm staring at it from my office here at 101 College, their Connecticut headquarters are here, all the rare disease therapies that they're discovering, developing, and marketing right from this very block in New Haven. So we just have to really package these stories and get them out there.
Yeah. It's interesting that you two know each other, and you've already had this idea of working together, this collaboration, because shaping CT's future, this event series, these conversations, this podcast, there's an element that's always present, it's ever present, and it's kind of the catalyst for these conversations, is that there is a sense of fiefdom, we've used that term, competition, that not everyone is joining conversations, not everyone's engaging, not everyone's working together to work toward the future. There was even, at one point, an organization in the state trying to brand the state, the term competition state came up, right? That it's a highly competitive state, it's competitive against itself, it's competitive against New York, against Boston, and that's the vibe. And now we have 2 parties who are not from here who join the conversation and already find ways to work together. And I find that interesting.
We're definitely not competitors. But we work together.
I don't feel that in Connecticut, and I'm not from here, and I've worked pretty much everywhere else, other states, other continents. I find Connecticut the most supportive. It's like a village in that everyone comes together and has an objective. I have not felt competition, even from organizations I should be competing against technically on paper, as may happen in other states. I also don't feel it from other states. So 46 states have a state bio organization. We collaborate constantly, we share best practices. We all have to band together at the moment to mitigate federal headwinds too. And I see quite a lot of collaboration at the state level, not just within the state, but also amongst other states to try and win in this current environment.
I think that's fantastic, and that's obviously what we want more of, right?
Yeah.
That we're all in this together. Anything you do, we do is going to make all our lives better. It's going to make our future better, you know?
Yeah, if I could just throw another thing on that is that, you know, I think innovation really happens at the boundaries, okay? And gone are the days when you innovate in just some corner in just your area. And both of our organizations recognize that, and so a central feature of what we do is to create as many collisions as we possibly can, because the innovation happens at those boundaries. And so I fundamentally don't view it in terms of competing. I view it as terms of let's work, let's grow this. Let's grow this.
Yeah, and I would qualify a little bit of what James was describing. I think of it a little bit differently. I think that the organizations are extremely collaborative in practice, and then in the communication, it becomes fragmented, and it becomes maybe not competitive, but seeking credit, right? And I think part of that is I was describing it as like, no matter what, we're in Yale shadow. No matter what, we're in insurance insert brand shadow. No matter what, we're in, Sikorsky and Electric Boat and Pratt Whitney shadow. Like, no matter what we're manufacturing. So it seems like those that are trying want to get their kind of credit outward, right? And there's so many organizations. There's 10 organizations that are all trying to recruit businesses from overseas to come here. They're all 10 saying different things, right?
I
still
am not seeing that. When we have an organization, that's interested in setting up shop in Connecticut, in my experience in the past 2.5 years, we band together. We come together with the state. We sit here with Yale Ventures, any other parties, depending on what type of organization it is that's interested to come here. And then we make sure we put our best foot forward together. And I understand what you're saying, and I have experienced that elsewhere. I just have not experienced that in Connecticut.
I would argue, though, that you are, because when the opportunity is here, you're 100% right. But I would say, if that was actually true, you wouldn't have trouble getting people to pick up the phone from a company in Connecticut, right? The narrative has not taken form outside, because otherwise they would take the call. Otherwise they would know there's opportunity, there's innovation, there's funding, there's resources. It's only once they've expressed interest, the state rolls out the red carpet, right? Everyone comes together. That's at least from what we've seen.
We are definitely, I think a prime example is, the trade show Bio. So the state, through BioCT, led the booth. We each had a corner of the booth, attracting talent, attracting companies in our space together. Yale had one table, UConn another, various startups. And we each also shared, the financial expenditure of that joint effort. I think we're seeing an uptick in the number of talent and companies coming to the state of Connecticut. BioCT puts out a report every year. We see the statistics. It's working. It just takes a little bit of time. We're also seeing Yale Ventures now under Josh Cabal spin out more companies at a faster rate than ever. So there's more coming out of Connecticut. There's more coming into Connecticut, and we're having an easier time. I think the challenge being is, getting someone from out of state just to come here and see for themselves. But once they do, we're seeing definitely an increase in the number that accept jobs here.
You lure them in with pizza and don't let them leave.
We're in such a new area that, literally, I mean, people, because of the position of Yale and UConn in sort of the quantum technology, I mean, people just, they seek us out. I mean, they literally do.
That's good. I mean, that's good.
It's awesome. It's great. I mean, it's
but just from themes and conversations and discussions in prior events, that's not felt across necessarily the rest of the industries in Connecticut, right?
Yeah, and I can only speak to, my small amount of experience.
So I'm probably going to be shooting myself in the foot, and I can't speak for other industries, but we're working on a press release that BMS just asked to join our board and is joining our board because they're really excited about the growth of life sciences in Connecticut. So if you look at BioCT's Legislative Affairs Subcommittee, it's not just companies in the state, it's companies, such as BMS, Regeneron, other big companies that have a vested interest in the state of Connecticut, and their eyes are very much on our startups.
There's one thing I'm always very interested in, because our organization, we work with a lot of higher ed, specifically brand marketing, that sort of thing. But experiencing it from their side, the advancements of the world, right? And what is education, what are jobs, and how are people preparing for that? And you talked a little about your effort in working with the educational system. What do you do to help support them, to inspire them, to provide resources, to inform them how they need to adapt to the jobs you're creating?
Yeah, the most efficient way to do that is to have the end users and customers delivering that message. And so our role in that is to facilitate that dialogue. And again, I point to the fact that it's such a new growing area that the biggest value add that we can have is to facilitate the kinds of conversations between higher ed and end use customers. I'll just give an example. We just did a fairly large session. It's a pilot program right now that brings together thought leaders in higher ed and in the industries that are really going to be the early adopters, like fintech, like defense, like pharmaceuticals, advanced materials. We brought these folks together, and they love it because they're getting to hear specifically why how the technology that they're developing can be deployed.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing things go in both directions now, which I'm really enthused about. So for instance, Connecticut Innovation has a life science career fair that they run every year, where all the employers come, meet with students, schools are bussed in. We're seeing events led by specific schools. So a plug for next Friday, Southern is having an event here in New Haven on emerging technologies. So the goal is not only to inform students, but also faculty and make sure there's that networking. And we're preparing the curriculum to train students, for the next generation of jobs. And we see now also, the sizable employers have various departments where they're making sure they're engaging in these public-private partnerships, mentoring students, have these cooperations too. But I would say it's really through internships and work experience that we're seeing students, stay because they're gaining incredible employment right out of school. So we're preparing them, we're informing the curriculum at these schools. They're spending their summers in these high-paying quality jobs here in the state, and then they're landing employment the day that they graduate at higher rates than we've seen in a very long time. And that's what's going to keep them here, and that's what's going to keep employers having their funnel of talent filled here as well.
My follow-up was going to be about curriculum and how much of a need that is, or how active a role you're playing with the end users or employers. Because from our work with higher ed, we also know sometimes getting faculty to create new programs can be challenging.
The faculty, they're in the area that I'm familiar with, for quantum tech, they're actually hungry for what the applications are. And one of the things that we see right now in quantum technology, quantum computing specifically, is that it's clear that what's needed is dedicated degree programs for quantum computing, quantum technology. you were seeing institutions that are just starting that right now, and then it's got to be pushed down. It's got to be pushed down, to the 2 years and the community colleges, and even below that, and upskilling, reskilling, a bunch of stuff like that.
Exposure early. Right?
Yeah. And look, it's one of the things that to like what Jodie's saying. I mean, there are certain ecosystems that have really gotten a good jump start on that, and we're happy to coordinate and collaborate with them. I've already had conversations with them about how that's an area that we can work together.
Mm-hmm.
I would just say it's not just Yale and UConn making sure they're training their students for the next generation. I am mesmerized by the schools with very limited resources, that sit all around here. I gave a shout out to Southern, but, UNH is building, I think they told me 133,000 square foot innovation facility. I just went into Gateway last week. They're doing everything they can to prepare their students for these high-paying jobs, and they're reaching out. And I think if we look at the innovation cluster again, too, the goal is really to make sure that we are networking, providing professional development for the faculty of these schools. And the state's funding is going towards that, so they don't have to pay for it. They were able to network and do that for free. So if we look at our events too, we want to make sure that everyone in the ecosystem's networking, building these collaborations, the partnerships, and being informed on both sides.
So thinking about, your respective spaces and, attendees that are going to come and learn and want to know about, what quantum is or what the opportunities are, or maybe they have, a startup or concept that they've been working on. Sort of, what would you kind of advise young entrepreneurs or new business leaders that are really trying to look at getting a foothold in your space in the state? How would you advise they go about it, and what are some resources that you would turn them to?
So I would start with for young entrepreneurs, particularly in a sort of tech heavy space like how quantum is currently configured. My first piece of advice is always fall in love with the problem and not the solution that you have. I mean, in the area that I'm in, it oftentimes can be dominated by, great, exciting hammers that are looking for nails. And so I encourage entrepreneurs to really try to focus their attention on the problem that they need to solve. And the way that they do that is by talking to customers, talking to end users, and driving at it that way. The second thing I would say for young entrepreneurs is that you need mentors, and there are plenty of those around. There's one of the things that we're very proud of is that the Entrepreneur in Residence, or EIR network, is robust, and we have one for QuantumCT, and that's gonna grow. And finally, there are multiple things, but finally, I would say that you want to grow a team around, for a young entrepreneur and a young founder, a team around, skill sets that you don't necessarily have, and you don't have to be the smartest person in the room, right? I mean, you don't have to have that burden. Those are a few things I would say.
No, that's great. Jodie,
I think Al,
pharma,
captured everything. I would just say in the life science ecosystem, BioCT tends to be a triage resource center. So if we don't know the answer, or we don't, have that connection, we'll find a way, we'll make other introductions. The one advice I would give, what I see often, for first-time founders in my space, they tend to be physicians, scientists, MD, PhDs, brilliant. They get very attached to the science. So I think understanding their gaps, as Al mentioned, and it might be around, financial acumen or landing investors and growing a company and a marketing plan. And I think Al gave a shout out for the Entrepreneur in Residence program that now is not only at Yale, but it's at UConn as well, and getting these free resources too. The state even provides free resources in how to build an investor deck. So I think making sure to be aware of all the resources available, reaching out, networking, and then filling those gaps.
It's interesting. You both sort of essentially said the nail, not the hammer. What's the nail in your mind? What's the ideal nail?
I think that's a thing that's being developed right now. I think that, honestly speaking, I think quantum technologies are new enough that we're figuring that out. But we do have a sense of where those are going to be. I mean, and like I said, there's going to be defense, advanced materials. There's going to be drug design. There's going to be fintech, portfolio management. There's going to be, there's going to be, encryption technologies that can't be broken. We have a good sense of that's going to be the case. And I'll say again, to come back to Connecticut, I mean, one of the things that Connecticut has, and our customers say this, not us necessarily, not us, we repeat it, but I said we have thought leadership. That's well known, okay? The second is that we have an incredibly high density of these early adopters. I mean, you look number 3 in defense, number 1 in insurance. I think it's number 3 or whatever. I'm sorry, no, I think it's in life sciences, I think it's number 12, the state ranked number 12. And those numbers change, but the point is that people are attracted to the fact that you can drive, draw a radius, and you can drive sort of an hour and a half in either direction, and you can encounter the companies that are leading that charge, that are the early adopters. So we kind of know that's going to be the general area. Yeah.
Jodie, we'll kind of give you final word. What do you that you're not under NDA about, but what are you most excited about? About making its way out of Connecticut, the next new innovation, the nail, right? That's going to see the light of day.
So for me, it's actually all about policy and legislation, and I have made that BioCT's first priority because the reason that I shifted that focus, we can innovate and we can produce life-saving therapies, but if patients cannot access them, it's irrelevant. So for me, it's all about access and equity. We want to support innovation, but what's worse to a parent or a patient is if an innovation exists and either they or their child cannot access them. So that's my main focus. Number 1, ensuring a favorable fiscal and policy environment in the state of Connecticut. And we're seeing now a new era. If we look at, the AG, I think, had 36 lawsuits against the federal government. The governor is authorizing vaccines that we invented, decades ago here in the state. So we need to ensure that all Connecticut residents have access to the testing and medicines that they would benefit from.
Well, thank you both. I know we're coming up on some meetings and we want to give you some time. So, Jodie, appreciate your time. I would thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's always great to be with Jodie and collaborate on things. And it's going to be, as she said, it's going to be many more in the future. It's a delight listening to her talk about these things.
But we'll always remember this is our first joint effort. So more to come.
Any final words?
I just want one comment. I mean, we talked a lot about workforce, and I think that's really critical. And I just want to emphasize the importance of we have a big effort around just inclusive growth, and what we have to try to do is to incorporate populations that have just not historically participated in what many feel is the next big revolution. And we want to make this accessible and to make it clear that lots of people, we grow and lots of people can participate in this to access communities that have historically not participated. There's just not enough people out there to exploit the potentials that we see. So that would be one of the thoughts that I would sort of close with from my side.
Important, yeah. For sure.
And I'm just going to give a plug for everyone to sign up on bioct.org to our newsletter. We share events from every organization around the state. So you were talking about how this is the prelude to the event on the 19th in Stamford. That's on our events calendar. We try and make sure that, we arm all of Connecticut, but not just Connecticut, even, folks fly into our events from other countries even. So get out, engage, make sure you network.
Love it. Perfect wrap up.
Yeah.
Thank you both.